and we'll get started. Take it away, Hannah.
All right, great. So yes, I am Hannah Keller. I participated in a program called Minnesota GreenCorps, which is an AmeriCorps program that's run through the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And they connect young professionals with host sites throughout the state and to carry out environmental projects. And I was selected to carry out my term with Dakota County, who had this idea for this project to work on wasted food prevention in schools because they have a school recycling program and they wanted to incorporate wasted food into that. So the program term was from October 2018 and just wrapped up in August 2019. Okay, so I'll kind of briefly go through why wasted food, why we're talking about wasted food. So as most of you probably know, 40% of food goes uneaten, and a lot of that is from the consumer end. And then additionally, wasted food costs a lot of resources. 10% of the U.S. energy budget goes to grow food that is never actually eaten, along with 25% of all freshwater supplies. So really resource intensive. And then looking at the EPA's food recovery hierarchy, with the project, we really wanted to focus on source reduction and reuse. Many of the schools that we were working with had access to organics recycling or composting, but we wanted to move higher up the hierarchy and get to the source reduction and reuse or feed hungry people with the cafeteria food. So why focus on schools? So first of all, wasted food is wasted nutrition. There's so many people, in the school system that are, devoted to making sure that students are getting nutritious meals, getting the meals that they need. And then in addition, it's a learning opportunity not only for students within the classroom or within the school about wasted food and why it's important to think about how much we're wasting, but also for the county to understand what's being wasted in the cafeterias. And then it's a big environmental benefit just because there's every day there's breakfast and lunch and then sometimes a dinner service. And so any ways that you can reduce the amount of food waste that's coming from any of those meals, and you can replicate that over the course of an entire week, school year, et cetera, it has a big environmental benefit. So the goals for the project were to evaluate the barriers and opportunities to preventing wasted food in schools, pilot some best practices, national best practice, both research and then in addition to piloting some, and then measuring the amount of wasted food generated before and after implementation, and then evaluate the results of the project to provide recommendations to the Dakota County School Recycling Program. So these are our pilot partners. I just wanted to show you that we wanted to recruit different age levels. So we recruited 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and then the School of Environmental Studies in Apple Valley, Minnesota is a 2-year high school, junior, senior year. So we got most age levels. And they're all public schools as well, I should say. So hope the audio works. Let me know if it doesn't. Are you able to hear that? Hello?
A little bit.
Can you play it on your end, Jenny?
Yeah, maybe that would be better. Try playing it again.
Okay.
Full screen. Nah, it doesn't work. Okay, try it on mine. Fun times. We should have tested the audio out. Didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, keep talking. I'm going to install.
Okay, yeah, so this video is just a video that we created of our tray audit process, which is just a term to mean what process we use to measure the amount of wasted food coming from student lunch trays. So as the video will sort of describe, it's a whole process of interviewing students to why they weren't able to finish their food, and then weighing out all the individual food items to see what items are being wasted the most. And potentially from the interview answers, we can figure out why, or solutions to how to address those certain food items might naturally appear. So that's sort of and then the goal with this video is that so if future schools want to conduct a tray audit, it's a resource for them to look at how to do one.
Okay, have it up. So I'm gonna, if you stop share, or I will share, and let's see if this works. All right, so
Okay.
let's,
And do you want to go to maybe minute 3?
minute 3?
Yeah, just because the beginning is a lot of
Yeah.
intro, like I just talked about.
Okay, tell me if you can hear this.
I cannot.
You cannot?
No.
Okay, that's fine. If we want to, let's just play the video without the
Mhm.
sound, and if you want to talk through it.
Sure. All right, so yeah, so it jumps right into step number 2, where I was talking about interviewing students. So first, the student will ask what's left on your tray, and then why weren't they able to finish it, and then record the answers either on a Google Pad in some cases, or a Google form, or paper pencil. And this was a really fun process for the students just because they got to interact peer-to-peer. Sometimes with the younger students, their answers are influenced by, you know, someone who just went right before them, or if you ask, you know, a student why they weren't able to finish their food, sometimes they think they're in trouble. So just we had to make it clear that, you know, they weren't in trouble for not finishing their food. We just wanted to gather more information on why they weren't able to finish. So then from there, after the interview process, the students hand off their tray to a volunteer, and then our volunteers sort it into buckets by the individual food items. So typically milk would go first, and then the different entrees, and then fruits and vegetables. And then the trays were set aside as well, so we could count how many students or how many trays this amount of food represents. And then additionally, we separated out trays that had no leftovers at all and trays that had some amount of leftovers. So then we could tell what % of students were actually eating everything versus had leftovers. And our great volunteers were oftentimes the student green team members, in addition to some Dakota County volunteers. And we also kept prepackaged, unopened items separately. So the last shot was counting of sealed milks, sealed string cheeses, things that were never opened and could potentially be shared. And that was kept separate from the weights of these buckets. And so then from there, the buckets were weighed with all the different food items, then emptied out, and then later the weight of the bucket was subtracted out, so you just get the weight of the actual food.
Oh.
So yeah, this is again just showing us counting the sealed items. And then also if the school did have a share table, if you are familiar with not familiar with the share table, I'll talk more about it later. But we tried to track how many items were successfully being placed on a share table and how many items were still going to the audit station or potentially were being composted or thrown away at the end of the meal period. So we were trying to track how successful their current share table was as well. And then I think you can end it now, Jenny, if you want.
Okay. And I'll stop sharing my screen if you want to continue sharing.
Okay.
Great. We see your slides.
Great.
Great.
Okay, so based on this first round of tray audits, we did one round before we implemented any practices and then another round afterwards to measure their success. So what we found during the first round of tray audits was, depending on the school size and the grade level, there were 16 to 125 unopened, uneaten packaged items that were being wasted every day. This is an image from our middle school pilot, and this is just from one meal period. So they had this times 4 other meal periods. And then this is a grab from Pine Bend Elementary. Their wasted food over the course of 2 days in pounds. And this just shows that milk, entrees, and fruit were the heaviest wasted food categories. And this is consistent across all 5 of our partner schools, that milk, entrees, and fruit were the top 3 heaviest or most wasted categories. And then 43 to 83% of students had leftovers. This again depended on the grade level. Typically, the middle school and high school level had more amount of their students finishing everything, and then as they got younger, more students were more likely to have leftovers. And then the image here, you can just see when we're talking about leftovers, oftentimes it's, you know, a completely unbitten PB&J or a barely touched chicken sandwich. It's not like they had a couple bites left. They had a really big chunk of their food. And then from the interview portion of the tray audits, the two biggest answers that really came out of that for why students were unable to finish their food were that they got too full and they took too much food, and they didn't have enough time to finish. But again, as I was mentioning earlier, it's sometimes hard to get students to answer independently of their peers, so they might just copy, you know, what the person in front of them said. But these two were the most popular, and sometimes they were said in different terms. And then wasted food per student per day ranged from 0.12 pounds to 0.35 pounds. Again, the lower range, the lower weight is from our high school, and then the 3 elementary schools ranged from 0.3 pounds per student per day to 0.35 pounds per student per day. So that just shows as the younger the students are, the more likely they're, the higher the weight that they're wasting. And these numbers might not seem a lot just per student, but when you multiply that out over the course of an entire school day, year, that adds up to a really high poundage, and I'll touch on that a little later as well. Okay, so best practices that we tried. So conducting regular tray audits. It identifies problem areas specific to your school, so it can help, you know, reveal some solutions potentially. Also get students involved. Like I was saying, the green team at schools often assisted with our tray audits. They were our primary source of volunteers, so it was really great to get them involved. And then also you can keep track of your progress, so you can see if whatever strategy you're going to implement in the future, if you remeasure, you can go back to that baseline data and compare. We also ask schools to provide a share table. So some of the images on the left are share tables that were pre-existing prior to this pilot project. They were oftentimes unattractive or unlabeled, not necessarily clean looking. So we had the share tables on the right implemented with new signage with images and rules to make it very clear to students what it's for. And I should say, for those of you who don't know what a share table is, it's a place where students can place their unbitten, unopened, uneaten items. So like an apple, their peel is completely intact, or a bag of carrots or milk. They can place those sealed items on the share table, and a student who might want another helping can take from that cart. The Minnesota Department of Education also has lots of resources on how to have a share table, what needs to be in place as far as food safety. So that was a really helpful resource for our schools. Also, providing access to water was another best practice that we tried. So the main answer for why students were unable to finish their milk that we got from the interview portion of the tray audits was that they were thirsty, but they did not have a readily available beverage option other than milk. So they took a couple sips, and that's all that they were able to finish. So we tried giving 2 schools access to these portable water dispensers and cups. And then in addition, we found out that the National School Lunch Program actually requires that drinkable water be made available to students at no charge in the place where their meals are served. So it was kind of a double whammy where students were required to have access to water, and then they were also provided another beverage option to milk. So at one elementary school where this was implemented, about 14% of students chose to drink water from the dispenser, and approximately 6 gallons were drank each day for a population of 400 students. And then at the middle school, 19% of students choose to drink from the dispensers. So it was very popular from the students as well. One of our elementary schools also offered appropriately sized servings or half-size entree portions to its students. So oftentimes elementary schools will offer to the younger students that they can get a half-size pizza, like you can see in the image. I'm just cut down the middle because they know that they won't be able to finish it. And we wanted to see if this was standardized across all grade levels, all the way up to 6th grade, if they were offered half-size portions, would that reduce entree waste? And the elementary school that implemented this saw a 38% decrease in entree waste, so it was very successful. The only challenge they had was making sure that the selection that students make in the morning, they're consistent when they actually get to the meal period and ask the cafeteria staff what meal that they selected. We also, the same elementary school, tried time to eat reminders, so about 5 minutes before the end of each meal period. The lights were dimmed. Students were asked to settle down, quiet down, and focus on finishing their last bites before they got up to sort their trash on waste before they went back into the classroom. And this elementary school saw an 8% decrease in students who had any leftovers at all, and then a 23% decrease in overall lunch waste. And then also teachers told us during the post-audit days that these time-to-eat reminders were also very helpful for behavior issues, such as like getting students ready to go back into the classroom after socializing with their friends. This 5-minute silent period really helped with that transition. We also wanted to educate students on what was actually required for them to take, and then based on that, they could make decisions that would minimize their waste. So the most commonly confusing requirements under the USDA lunch program was that it's not required to take milk if you fulfill other requirements. You do have to take a half cup of fruit or vegetable, and then you have to have 3 out of 5 items. So dairy, protein, fruit, vegetable, or grain. You have to have 3 out of those 5. And this picture is a group of high school students who were all learning about the meal requirements, and then they then acted as ambassadors to their peers about what was actually required of them. And they sort of got into the nitty-gritty of all the details, but at another elementary school, they really wanted to focus on their milk waste and reducing milk waste. So they were really stressing the idea that it's not required to take a milk if you fulfill other requirements under the USDA meal program. So it can really be tailored to what you want to focus on, the grade level, et cetera. And we also implemented a fridge and cooler program at at our middle school and one elementary school. These mini fridges housed leftover items from the share table that were not taken during the meal period, and they are housed in a family support worker's office within the school, and this family support worker was already distributing snacks and food throughout the day to hungry students, and so this was a great way to, they didn't have to pay anything out of pocket for this food. It was coming from the cafeteria, which was great. And then any food that is left over in these mini fridges from the week are packed up in these coolers and sent home with identified families for the weekend. One elementary school also tried a one last sip challenge where they asked students to take one last sip of their milk before they got up to sort their waste, and that was just to bring awareness to how much they're wasting every day. Their green team kept track of, you can see the little gallon markers on the yellow bin. They kept track of how many gallons of milk they were wasting every day, and then they would set goals from there just to raise awareness, again, around their milk waste. And then our middle school and high school also implemented flavor stations. So our middle school and high school implemented these flavor stations. The students at our high school actually came up with the idea themselves. When I asked them, what do you think that you can do to reduce food waste in their school, they said it would be a really great idea to get this spice station to allow for a little bit of meal customization, add the flavors that they like to the cafeteria meals, would encourage them to eat it more. And then additionally, students at our middle school were already bringing in a spice called tahini, or a spice mix called tahini, and so they were already doing this on their own. So we provided that school with a low sodium version of tahini, all within the sodium requirements mandated by the USDA and their meal program. So that was really cool, sort of like a student-driven idea. So after all these different initiatives were implemented across our partner schools. They saw varying results, but every single school saw a reduction in at least some food categories and typically where the efforts were focused. So just to give you a snapshot of one school, I want to dive into one elementary school who tried the largest variety of different strategies to reduce food waste. So this, I'll show you a case study of Garlow Elementary, who tried time-to-eat reminders, half-size portion offerings, the water dispensers, a new share table, a mini fridge, and then USDA meal requirement education. So this is a screen grab. They tested 4 different meals for their tray audits, and the same meals were tested both in the pre-tray audits and the post-tray audits, just so comparisons could be consistent. So at the beginning, students were wasting 0.3 pounds of food per student per day, and then in the post-tray audits, they were found to waste 0.23 pounds per student per day. So that's a 23% overall decrease in wasted food, and it's consistent, as you can see, across the 4 different meals. So it wasn't just, you know, one fluke where one meal went down by a lot. It's consistent across all of them. And it's also consistent across grade level. So even, you know, kindergartners who might typically waste the most because they have the smallest stomachs or what have you, they also saw a 15% decrease. You know, 3rd and 4th grade saw a little bit higher, but K, 1, and 2 all saw a decrease in their food waste. And when you multiply the numbers, the amount of wasted food per student per day out by the entire school year, the strategies that they implemented resulted in a savings of 3,745 pounds per school year, which is really great. And then and when you just focus in on wasted milk, it's it's more than half a ton of wasted milk prevented as well. So other best practices that we were not able to try in this pilot, scheduling recess or exercise before lunch. It shows that you can reduce plate waste by as much as 30%, but just due to scheduling conflicts, there wasn't a school that was able to change their schedules to allow for recess to happen beforehand. But oftentimes our elementary schools did have a large majority of their grades already offering recess or exercise before their meal periods. And then extending lunch periods from 20 to 30 minutes can also reduce plate waste. Again, we were unable to test this out just because, you know, it's hard to change a lunch schedule right in the middle of a school year. But we really tried to assist with time management with the time to eat reminders and the dimming of the lights, just so students still had that time management built into their meal period. And then future considerations beyond this project are back of house needs in terms of wasted food, and then incorporating the share tables into yearly sorting behavior education, so making sure that right away at the beginning of the year students know what the share table is and what it's meant for and how to use it. Bulk milk dispensers can provide a really good opportunity for students to take the portion of milk that they know that they can finish so that they don't have to take a pre-portioned carton and then will only take a couple sips out of it. And then extending lunch periods. So one of the resources that we used a lot in this pilot is the Smarter Lunchrooms Movement webpage. Their scorecard has, you know, 60 strategies on how to reduce food waste in a school cafeteria. The Minnesota Department of Education also has really great resources on share tables and how to implement one. And then the Minneapolis Public Schools here in the Twin Cities have a True Food No Waste Action Plan, which was a really helpful document. It's a 3-year plan that they have to tackle food waste in their schools, which is where some of the ideas like time to eat reminders came from for our pilot. And then the Dakota County School Recycling Program. I think some of the resources that we used in this project will soon be up on that webpage. I don't think they're up quite yet. I'm sure Jenny can speak more to that, but they will be there as well. So that was a summary of the project. So I'll open it up to questions that you guys have.
I just unmuted everybody, so hopefully that works. Oh, maybe it doesn't. you might have muted yourself, so I can't unmute that. Any questions for Hannah?
Hi.
Oh, I did. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just sent a couple questions into the chat box, but yeah, I just wanted to, wasn't sure if you guys saw them, and I just had to write them down before I forgot. So there's a couple there, but I can read them out loud. So the first question is, were the schools that you selected to audit chosen with the free and reduced lunch participation in mind?
Yes, so we wanted to choose a public school that was participating in the National School Lunch Program, just because that's a good representation of the number of schools in Dakota County. The majority of them are on that program. And then additionally, we reached out to the district nutrition supervisors, and they recommended schools who might be particularly interested in the program. So that's sort of how we recruited.
Great. And then, yeah, following up on that, did you have the opportunity to share the results of the audits with your district child nutrition directors and kind of possibly engage them on, you know, practices that they can better do? It sounds like you did, because you definitely looked at the serving sizes and stuff like that, but I'd be curious to learn more about what their receptiveness was.
Yeah, so throughout this project, they were in the district nutrition staff as well as the school nutrition staff were directly involved in the development of this project, what strategies they wanted to implement. So a lot of the ideas actually came from them, like such as the half-size portions. Some schools were already doing that, and that was an idea that we got from district nutrition supervisors to implement elsewhere. And then after the pre and post audits and we got these results, they were shared in a one-on-one meeting so they could see the results of the efforts. And then additionally, this was shared at a school recycling workshop for the whole county. The whole county school system was invited. You know, we had about 50 people show up, and they saw this presentation as well.
Thanks. And then my last question is, can you explain more how the half-size entree option still allows them to comply with the serving size requirements for students? Because I've often heard from our nutrition directors that they can't reduce the serving size because they have to serve every child, no matter if it's a kindergarten student up to 5th or 6th grade, the same serving.
Yeah, so we really left that up to kitchen staff to know which entree items would still fulfill requirements if they were cut in half. So such as the personal pizza that's featured in the photo, they knew that they could cut it in half and it would still meet the grain or protein requirement under USDA meal requirements. So we definitely left those portion sizes up to them. And then besides that, we strongly communicated what was required. So it is required that they take a half cup of fruit or vegetable. So making sure that students were aware of that rule. And again, just going back to the USDA meal requirement education, that tailoring it to the age of the students, so that students at the high school level might be more aware of the nitty-gritty of what's required of them. And then the younger students might have cafeteria staff helping them make selections along the way.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Hannah?
Are there any in the chat box? I can't see that.
Nope, it was just the ones we just went over.
Okay.
Which is fine. And you might have more later too. Hannah maybe answered all of your questions, so I am going to assume that. All of the information, including this PowerPoint, a tray audit guide, like with checkoffs and what materials you need and all of those things will be on the Dakota County website, as well as templates for weight logs, interviewer forms. What else is there? Oh, and then Hannah's report that is actually just was finalized yesterday, which is why we couldn't get it on our website as quickly. That'll all be online, and I'll send that link when it's up to Claudia, and she can send it out with notes or anything like that. So thank you all.
Definitely. Thank you. Thanks so much, Jenny and Hannah, for that great presentation. I do have a quick question that maybe is on other people's minds as well, but is there any, do you have any idea sort of whether any of these interventions are going to be adopted permanently in some of these schools?
Yeah, so certainly with the share tables, that's definitely something that was either already in place or that that the school staff was ready to get behind for the following school year, and they all expressed incorporating that into their yearly sorting behavior at the beginning of the school year. And then additionally with the dimming of the lights, that was a really popular one just because, you know, it's free, it's easy to implement, and it showed that it was very effective. So that's evidence that that will be continued. I think, yes, and then the spice stations at the high school and middle school. It was reported that they were both very popular resources for the students, and it was low labor costs to the kitchen staff. So those will continue as well.
And this is Jenny. On that note, I can say, like, from Hannah's recommendations and BMP's, we've incorporated help and resources into our structure of the permanent school recycling program. So Allie, my teammate, is in charge of that program, and so now now cafeterias are allowed to buy share tables from our and milk dispensers and all of that from the program and get reimbursed, or we'll just buy it and give it to them.
I have another question, if that's okay. This is Claudia again. I'm sorry if I missed this. My internet actually went out a couple times doing that, but I think I got 95% of it though. But did you mention at all whether the students or whether the schools, any of them were already composting, or did you look at all at the effect of a composting program on all this, or did the wasted food just go into the trash stream? I'm just wondering sort of if composting had a role at all in any of this.
Yeah, so it wasn't a factor when we were recruiting schools to participate in the program. In fact, we actually wanted some schools that did have access to organics, recycling, and composting, and then some schools that didn't, just to see if there was a difference in how much wasted food was generated. But based on the participants that we had, 4 of our schools had access to organics recycling, and then our high school level did not.
And do you know whether, I don't know if you collected any information, but do you know whether sort of the existence of composting in the cafeterias had any effect on the students' amount of waste or comfort with waste or anything like that? You probably know what I'm trying to get at, right? Whether the students sort of felt like, well, if it's being composted, it's okay that I didn't eat it. I'm just kind of wondering if that played into this at all, or if you weren't able to look at that.
Right. I don't have any specific data that necessarily leads to that. I didn't hear anything, working with students that they thought that after, I walked through the hierarchy, it was pretty well understood that composting was sort of the next to last option. We don't want to waste food in the first place. But yeah, and just because only one of our partner schools did not have access to organics recycling, it's hard to tell by this project what impact that had.
And I can say, this is Jenny, anecdotally, it's composting is a pretty abstract theory. So especially for our elementary school kids, I don't know if there's any of that guilt relief that we see normally in residents, adults, or older kids. They're just not making that leap to where things are going. That's actually what we're trying to do in curriculum, is like, when you put it in the recycling bin, here's where it goes. They're not connecting that yet. And there's not a ton of push on education. We implement organics, and then we're still lacking a little bit of like what that means and where it goes and what it turns into. So anecdotally, I don't think that was a factor.
Hi,
this is Gary from New York State DEC. I have a question about the share table guidance.
Yeah.
It talks, I happened to open it up, and it talks about thick-skinned fruits, and it puts apples in that category, which we're not successful in doing here in New York. Do you have any background about how that happened?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't. I was unaware that, some programs do not allow apples, but based on the Minnesota Department of Education partnered with the Minnesota Department of Health to create those resources, so they might have a better answer for that.
Okay, I'll try to contact the Minnesota Department of Health. Thank you.
We can give you a contact too if you'd like, a direct contact that we've been working with.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yep, and there was, I know that question came up a lot. We were lucky that the MDH and Department of Ed just recently, within the last year or so, had given us this guidelines because there were a lot of questions about fruit, and some inspectors were saying something, some were saying something different. So we asked them for guidelines, and they just came out with that. So maybe it's because it's such a recent trend or push that apples were acknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
This is Claudia. I do have one more question. I was wondering whether the schools that did these pilots, whether they also did any sort of lesson plans or sort of classroom style, classroom education on kind of the issue of food waste in general. Like, did they try to tie it into any of their, science or math classes?
Yeah, so that really depended on the specific school and how they wanted to, if they wanted to incorporate it into their lesson plans. So a lot of it did focus on the green teams, got them involved. So I spoke at many presentations during their club meetings. They were the ones acting as ambassadors throughout their school on the issue of wasted food. Particularly at the high school level, they used a student classroom group called AVID as their end-of-year leadership project. They incorporated this project into that curriculum guideline. But other than that, there wasn't direct classroom tying with curriculum standards.
Great, thank you. I've been asking a lot of questions, but does anybody else have any questions? Maybe listening to the conversation, something else came up that you want to ask?
This is Jeanette in Corvallis, Oregon. I just don't remember the percentage that you were saying of reduction in wasted food when you did the time to eat reminders and the light dimming. I was just wondering if you could repeat that.
Yeah, so that particular strategy is it's hard when a school is doing 4 different strategies how to measure the exact results of each specific strategy. But overall, the school that implemented that strategy they implemented along with a couple others, but they saw an 8% decrease in students who had any leftovers at all, and then a 23% decrease in overall lunch waste.
Thank you.
This is Andre with a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so thank you for that presentation. One of our focus areas in the area of food is also the packaging. Talk about, please, the types of serviceware that you use that are used at the schools. It look like plastic, and were the trays styrofoam, or what were they made of?
Yeah, so we had 2 schools that had reusable trays, an elementary school and our high school level, and then 2 of our elementary schools and our middle school used compostable disposable trays. And then beyond that, serviceware included paper boats, compostable utensils, if they had access to organics recycling. 2 of our schools had reusable utensils. Sometimes the school had like plastic fruit cups so that there was like pre-portioned half-cup amounts of the fruit and vegetables as part of their requirement. And then just as far as the share table items like carrots, there was bags of carrots that were prepackaged, the cartons of milk that were pre-sealed, string cheese, and then PB&J was also an everyday option across our schools, that if students didn't like either entree serving being offered, they could choose to have a wrapped PB&J.
Thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I just want to give a huge thank you to Hannah and also to Jenny. This is great work, and it's always so nice to see when these interventions actually make a measurable difference. So it's really awesome, and I hope that these schools and others can continue to do this work. So I really appreciate you taking the time, especially since you've moved on to another position. Congratulations. And I hope you're able to sort of still participate in these calls and maybe let us know what's going on with the schools down the road. So thank you so much. I think we're going to turn to doing a round robin with our remaining time since it's been a few months.